Hello, good day, happy Wednesday, and welcome to the Technology Futures session that I am absolutely delighted and privileged to deliver alongside with my good friend Mike Bechtel, who is joining us from Chicago.
Hey, everybody.
Mike is the innovator, the inventor, the investor, professor, and a friend. And I'm thrilled to have him join us today for this session. Mike is the lead author alongside the team that worked alongside with and published by the World Economic Forum, the latest study that we are going to discuss today, entitled Technology Futures. And who better to talk about the future than our chief futurist, which is the official title that Mike has within Deloitte. So Mike, thank you so much for your time. I've been excited about this session since I heard about the study. So it's finally here upon us. As we give a minute or two for our audience members to click on the link and dial in, I'll just let everyone know that this session is going to be an hour long, of which we anticipate about 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes of the conversations between Mike and myself, and a bit of presentation as well on the key elements of the study. And then we are going to have a Q&A feature available through the Zoom platform. So if any audience members would like to ask any particular questions, please feel free to send us your question through Q&A. We'll moderate those questions towards the end. Mike, again, thank you very much. Over to you, maybe brief introduction and a context of the study.
Yeah, well, Dalibor, first of all, thanks for having me. We've made this a bit of a habit, hanging out together with your gracious show and audience. I told my daughter that I was once again traveling to visit our neighbors to the north virtually. Yep. And it's never not a privilege. So thank you. This project, I mean, in short, this has really been, it's been an exciting opportunity to formalize and establish our work as technology futurists on a global stage. About 6 months ago, 8 months ago, really, the World Economic Forum approached Deloitte and said, hey, coming out of COVID, we are interested, yes, in an understanding of emerging trends in technology governance and emerging trends in what's new and cutting edge with leading organizations and both corporate and government. But we're also interested to get a handle on what's next, right? What does the future hold? And not in a dystopian, risk avoidant Black Mirror kind of a way, but in a positive, lean forward and make great things happen kind of a way. Yeah. And as I like to say, that they had us at hello, because we like to think of ourselves not as critics, but as co-creators of the future. And so, in short, and let me share. So check 1 2 1 2. Does the slide come through?
Works. Yeah, it does for sure.
Thank you, sir. So the result of our team's 7 months effort was this first of its kind flagship report. Flagship is industry speak for big, which on one hand is a distinctively Deloitte and World Economic Forum document, right? 60 something pages, 219 endnotes, well researched, risk reviewed. But on the other hand, there's a lot of novelty injected into that normalcy. And so, I look forward to talking with you, Dalibor, about what we've done, what we've learned, and I think importantly for our audience, what leaders ought to do to get hip to these emergent futures that we've uncovered. So shall we?
We absolutely shall. And
Okay.
I understand also that so World Economic Forum is famous for two global events. One is at Davos, the other one is the Global Tech Governance Summit. And I
Yeah.
understand that it was a few weeks ago that this report was one of the keynotes at
Yeah,
that
that's
summit,
right.
right?
Yeah, that's right. The GTGS, or Global Technology Governance Summit, took place in early April, the
Mhm.
5th through the 7th. And in this report, we were very grateful to say that it was featured prominently as part of the launch. The event was hosted by Japan in the virtual moment. It was a virtual summit, of course, but a great opportunity again to get some of these perspectives out on a truly global stage.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So here's the high level, and then we'll get into the medium level. The report breaks things into three big sections. The first piece of the work, and we'll go through each of these in some detail, is an exploration of emerging technology, not as a magical collection of buzzwords, but as a known, enduring trajectory through time. Okay. The second section proposes a novel rubric for doing futures work. I get asked all the time, futurist, how's that? Nostradamus, going to call the shot, Babe Ruth? And the answer is no. That it's a lot more quant, it's a lot more data driven than mysticism, right?
Yeah.
And then the third section lands the plane with, so what? Like, what do you do with all this knowledge of potential futures? And so we're going to hit on each of those today during our time together. And without further ado, here we are. So I like to say, gang, this is the wrong way to understand the future. A lot of times when you see a technology trends presentation, demonstration, conversation, it is, as Dalibor, you and I like to call it, a blizzard of buzzwords. And I don't know about you, Dalibor, but just as you start to learn this year's terms du jour, you get beat over the head with next year's. I mean, have you ever felt novelty fatigue, like too much novelty?
Yep.
Yeah. So what we like to do is we like to take a step back. My 15-year-old son likes to refer to that slide transition as, quote, fire. But that's to say, Dalibor, what is that? I'll use you as my Socratic partner in this dialogue. Any idea what this steampunk contraption might be?
Is it the Babbage's machine or?
Yeah.
There. Wow. We didn't prepare for this.
You are well qualified as a technology leader.
Wow.
Charles Babbage, correct. Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace, 1830 something, London, cook up the design for the first computer. And what's super interesting about that first computer design is in their notes, right? Adorably anachronistic, right? It's like, the system proposes the introduction of a reader and a store, a collection of arithmetic principles, and then a mill which processes the principles. And you read it and you're like, well, on one hand, this is Victorian jibber jabber.
Yeah,
But when
steampunk. Yeah.
right, steampunk, right. But when you get through the anachronisms, what you realize is they're talking about the same things we talk about at work today. And honestly, since dating myself, when I started my career in 1998, right? 3-tiered web architectures featuring a data layer, business logic, and an interface. It's the same thing. And so the first section of our report spends some time looking at these eternities. This idea that just as Babbage and Lovelace had the reader and the store and the mill, right? And my parents' generation, with their white lab coats and their PhDs and their formal training, right? Working room-sized machines with punch cards, these were differences of degree, not kind, right? A punched card was just the Hepcat mid 20th century version of Babbage's Victorian Reader, right? And banging on arithmetic tables was the version of banging on those steampunk tables. And, it wasn't a brass mill, it was a big, vacuum tube mainframe. Well, as time moved on, right, and as fortunes were made and, some were lost, what you tend to find is that through this long lens of history, every big new fad, movement, wave of change, emergent technology can be thought of as the natural successor to these knowns before it. Now, Dalibor, when you joined the party, was it a command line party or a GUI party?
Yeah,
I'm going to
command
try to
line.
date you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Command line.
Yep.
Green screens, right?
Yep.
Departmental microcomputers, right?
Yep.
Well, here's the thing, man. When you get to the current, there's something about the current that always feels fresh. Like, well, it's been understandable in hindsight, but hindsight's 2020. But this here VR stuff is a game changer. Or today's AI is truly different, right? Or blockchain, no, for real this time. New era in computing. And our takeaways for leaders. Okay, so for those of you who are thinking this is edutaining, but I'm not sure this matters to my work, it does. Okay. The first takeaway, we've already hit this note: emerging tech progression isn't random. Okay. Despite the enterprise sales executive that you last met with talking about the revolutionary and once in a lifetime opportunity, these are enduring trajectories and they're relatively straightforward at that. Mm. 2, notice the time frame up there. If you look there, Dalibor, right, like 175 years, 75 years, 50, 25, 10. Yeah. It's accelerating. Right? Alvin Toffler, one of the founders of Future Studies, he talked about future shock. This idea that it's not enough that there's always going to be something new, but it keeps coming faster. Mm. Well, it's true. It's true, right? The internet changed the world in 10 years and in mobile in 5 and IoT in 2.5. And that's real. And then the third is, and this is big and it gets a little philosophical, but it's important because it serves as the basis for why futures work. It's that the future is still coming, right? That in the mid 20th century, the command line crowd figured they lived in the future. We've arrived. We've reached the end of history. Everybody always feels like they're on the top of the historical food chain. And we are for now, but our kids will giggle that we still sat down and typed in passwords, right? And our grandkids will giggle that we had to ask to change the temperature in the room because their chip in their brain will talk to the thermostat for them and raise it 2 degrees if their hippocampus says they're cold.
I love how this is structured logically into these 3 mega trends or mega topics: interaction, information, computation. It actually helps logically think and in my head compartmentalize. Yeah. Right. This is very good.
No, thank you, sir. Well, I'll tell you, it, like anything that seeks to reduce, you're going to miss bits. Like, where's the robots? Where's 5G? Sure. Right. Networking and physical sensors and actuators are unsung heroes. And, you could build 5 lines, you could build 8, but most organizations for most of the last 200 years deal with these 3, right? These are the 3 big I's that make up IT. And that said, it's a helpful frame. Now, the second piece of the report, now that we've primed our readers and our stakeholders for this idea that, again, the future is knowable, right? And B, it's still coming. Say, okay, well, how do you go about figuring it out? Well, as I said earlier, down with crystal balls, up with quantitative frameworks. And so the first piece to the puzzle are trend lines. Our team spent some pretty significant time looking at the history of technology, sociocultural movements, and economic phenomena. And what we found in that research, Dalibor, was just about anything you can cook up can be classified under broad strokes as linear, as an exponential, or as a cyclical. Now, what's interesting is that cyclicals typically look like linears or exponentials, depending on where you are on the curve. But those of us with, a little gray hair, a little salt and pepper, will tell you that if you've been around long enough, or you just have an appreciation for history, you've seen that movie before.
Yep.
So, when you see petroleum prices doing this, you say, oh, it's unattainable. It's the end. You say, yeah, 1970s it happened. And then exploration advances said, we're going to figure it out. And then it, quote unquote, got better, depending on your frame. And so it goes with things like education, right? Or real estate. Some things are true hockey sticks, true exponentials. Others kind of ebb and flow. Now, what we do in future studies is we take those trend lines and we run them through. And yes, that's an eyeball for anybody. Hey, that looks like an eyeball. It's an eyeball. We run them through what we call a lens. And we're not predicting a single future, right? I said earlier, Babe Ruth calling the shot, right? That's a mug's game. That's gotcha. No, if you ever see somebody saying what will happen, run, don't walk away, right? That's a mark of charlatanism. Responsible futures work projects multiple possibilities. And because we've got these trend lines cooking, we're able to figure out which ones are probably going to happen, right? Because you've got a preponderance of trend lines pointing towards the same likelihood. And then what are the more fringy, the merely plausible, right? What we call the possibles. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing, man. This is an eye chart. When you put everything that you know and every supposition that you can imagine into the same visual space, it makes your eyes bleed, right? Or as my son would tell me, it's TMI, Dad. Too much information. Fire hose, right? Well, the concept that we introduced and that our team proposed and then iterated on was the simple idea that if you put a domain constraint, right? We call it a lens, okay? Not a rose-colored glasses. This isn't optimism, right? This is saying, hey, okay, let's put in this case a blue-colored glasses, an education lens on things. Now you're able to say, okay, here's the universe according to education from known to now, and here are some suppositions we can make about the future based on those, right? Critically, you look at the top and the bottom on the right, you say, okay, there's these non-controversial things, lifelong learners, meritocracy, nano degrees. Those are all probably happening. Then you get these antagonistic possibilities. In some ways, credentials seem to matter more than ever, right? People choosing B schools, but only these 5, and one day only these 3, and one day only that one university might matter. But then on the flip side, you got a whole set of trend lines suggesting that, I don't know about all that B school stuff. I'm going to focus on skills, right? Micro entrepreneurship, et cetera. You can do it with information, right? You can say, hey, this is the world according to information. It's a different basket of variables on the left, but that's all right because we're looking to project a different basket of futures over on the right. Or say economy, right? The takeaways are these, Dalibor and everybody. All trend lines are not created equal, which is to say it's the exponentials that really move the needle. 2, and I hit this note, it's not predicting a future, it's projecting multiple so that we can get a handle on optionality and maybes. And then 3, those filters, the blue lens, the green lens, the red lens, that's what helps you simplify and clarify. So Dalibor, I'd ask you reactions, thoughts, witty repartee. Let's give folks a break from me.
So I think this concept about the probable futures and possible futures is very, very helpful, actually. And I think that, so one thing that I really loved about what you were saying is that the game about the future is not about anything concrete and specific. It's about the likelihood
Right.
and optionality. So I think that this just thinking and seeing it this way is actually very, very helpful, right? Now, I like to compartmentalize things. It helps me think through them better.
Yeah.
So the fact that you are also segmenting this into the possibilities of the economy lens of the future and information lens and education lens and location lens
Right.
is really, it's really thoughtful. I am also, each one has its own story.
That was one of the big ahas and honestly, when we started our work, so I was a venture capitalist for a number of years. And, when you sit on the other side of the table from 4,000 entrepreneurs, each telling you that they have this world changing something, your eyes start to roll to the back of your head because you think, man, how much novelty can can the world handle? And specifically, how can everything matter all the time to everybody? And I think this fetish for disruption of I don't care what's happened, I'm going to go, to heck with orthodoxy. I'm going to move fast and break things, right? That shows up to established organizations and leaders, not as innovation, but sometimes as ignorance. And so what our work confirmed for us is that a respect for an acknowledgement of what's come and what's brought us to current, that's the responsible way to project what could be next, because you're grounding all this innovative thinking and future speculation. You're constraining it in enduring knowns, right? And that showed up in the opening bit on tech and then in this lens model, for sure. For sure.
Excellent.
So the four stories, briefly here, these were the four lenses. And again, in the report, right? Like and subscribe. I linked the report earlier. I'll share that link again, bit.ly/WEF Futures. But the real idea is this. In each of these lenses, we present these probables, right? Everything grounded in, research up to your eyeballs. And then these antagonistic possibles. On the education front, the real tensions that we saw were between, as I signaled earlier, this, on one hand, increasing race to the top to very particular branded institutions, where networks and I wouldn't quite say nepotism, but it's a fellow N-word, really seem to matter more and more and more in a world of networked information privilege. And then on the other side, you see these ideas of micro-credentialing and certs and skills-centric learning, right? Leading employers like a Google, for example, saying, listen, we have non-traditional ways to find the right skills because we found that the right skills don't always sit behind lots of letters after your name. And so, regardless of whether one of these polls wins out or both win out in a fragmented way, some of these enduring ideas like, well, learning has become lifelong and not something that happens K-12, right? Careers are giving way to gigs and gigs are giving way to side hustles like Fiverr, right? You see that the future of education might not be any one of those things to the right, but it probably smells a lot like a basket of those. Now, this can feel kind of academic and like, oh, okay, yes, that's a lot of equivocation and caveats. But what we did in the report, and something that I'm most proud of because I didn't do the work, I was privileged to lead the workers who did it, was our young leaders on our team wrote really good short stories that evoke the worlds imagined by these lenses. So again, Dalibor, we could talk about AR, VR, mixed reality learning till the cows come home. But what I'd recommend is that folks jump to page whatever in the report and read the story of Maya, my teammate Raquel Busqueno's short story about a young girl somewhere in the southeast corner of the globe who, on the basis of her own skills, is handed a pair of haptic gloves, a VR headset, and begins a virtual academy private school training in medicine. Before you know it, she's operating on patients via telemedicine robotics in South America. She wakes up in the middle of the night and shares slivers of time with her local friends because her job is in a different time zone, right? There's that old idea of future's already here. It's not evenly distributed. Our friends out east would say, oh, that's already my life. Well, get ready. It's likely to be more of ours.
Yep.
But what happens when that same doctor has to help a friend and she doesn't have her gloves handy? She's never worked without the digital aids, right? Some of you think, okay, that's kind of interesting. Some of you might have goosebumps. But the idea is we learn through this exercise, Dalibor, that feeling the future, stories, fiction, it serves utility, a business purpose, because it helps people say, oh, I get it. I see what you're cooking. I see where it's going. Would love your take on that one, man.
So, you know what? You mentioned something really important for us to all appreciate. The future is already here, just not evenly distributed. And I think that what we are living through is that global equalization, where this feels very, very real. This doesn't feel like a future that's far out.
Right.
This actually feels like something that we could be in,
right,
very much within the next, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years.
Right.
And I think it's particularly important, not just for us who are, in the business of technology to understand this, but this is actually very personally hitting, because I have children who are coming up to the age of, studies.
Yep.
This actually can be very, very important and relevant to think about,
Right.
as we advise our children of what to do, how to think about it.
Well, it's one of the taglines that we found resonates is this time spent as today being readers is time well spent to becoming tomorrow's leaders. And yes, it rhymes, and yes, it's cute, but it's true, because to your point, the norms and the orthodoxies that we take for granted today are just a couple dominoes from being immaterial, right? Mattering less. And so as, say, a VR headset, goes from $2,000 3 years ago to $200 today and $20 in 5 years, you start to say, wow, I guess you could do that, right? And, imagine communicating the value. Imagine pitching Uber as a business 10 years before it was a business. Like, man, we'd need the networking cost alone would bankrupt you. Well, until it didn't, right?
Yeah.
So moving through the other lenses briefly, the information lens, what we found in again, forecasting those trend lines through the model was there's never ending talk about privacy. There's never ending focus on connectivity and information, like almost omniscience seems to be a theme in all cases. Like, we're going to know all the things. The question is, who's we? Is it really a distributed power to the people we that feels and smells like blockchain and, data personalization and rights management? Or is it more of a series of gated communities, right? Corporations that earn our trust, that say, listen, we've got you covered, right? We're a walled garden. We're expensive, but you can feel free and comfortable in that Eden. Centralization versus distribution seems to be the fulcrum on which information management sits. And again, that can feel academic, and what do I do with it? Well, the story of Maple written by my teammate, Amy Golem. You know, if Maya was a try-hard, you know, child genius who made all the right choices, Maple is, you know, many of our worst fears of TikTok, Instagram culture gone awry, right? She's a professional influencer, but well beyond, you know, selling, you know, t-shirts or cosmetics for likes. She literally sells her data. Her mother thinks that it's unspeakable, a digital courtesan, right? She didn't work 2 jobs for Maple to, quote, sell herself this way. But the feeling is there more to life than just trafficking one's information? And in that story, our resident story is about privilege and how those born with a silver spoon might not have to, quote, sell out to keep up or get ahead. And so a really great story that a lot of our readers have said is their favorite because it's such a relatable reminder of you know, where they want their kids not to end up. And I think, Dalibor, one of the things you and I talked about earlier is none of these stories are meant to be Black Mirror, right? Black Mirror is amazing science fiction, but just as journalism, you know, if it leads or if it bleeds, it leads. Science fiction always shows the scary dystopia because that's interesting. These stories aren't looking for all the spooky bits. They're really looking for the balance bits. Here's what could go right. Here's what could go south, right? The Location Lens, briefly, is a story about, in many ways, what's going to happen to physical space and place in a post-COVID world. You know, every other article, it felt like in the Financial Times or in the Wall Street Journal prior to COVID was, yep, well, Manhattan and San Francisco are 116 times more expensive than Kansas. Well, nope, make that 126. And then something happened, the plague, where the game board got shuffled around. And concurrently with that, the rise of, right, AR, VR, the rise of AI, and changing norms about what it means to be at work. I mean, your office looks a lot different than I presume it did, 2 years ago, Dalibor?
Oh, it sure does. I got flags.
You're right, right. And so the real takeaway here is, again, with these trend lines, and again, they're not just tech, right? This isn't just because of AR, VR advances, we can work from home. It's no, because of changing norms, real estate prices, arbitrage opportunities. You roll them all together through the crank, and you find that there's all sorts of stuff that's likely to be part of the next normal. Smarter cities, right? At-home services, virtual everything, right? My son thinks that Fortnite is a concert venue because he's 9 and he doesn't remember the before times with stadiums.
I just on the question about the office. I mean, a couple of interesting data points. I put this together, but with my commute dropping from 40 minutes to 40 seconds, only last year, I have saved 53 work days equivalent in 1 year.
Days.
53 days. That's not counting flights. And you and I both know that for us to execute this conversation a year ago, how much effort, logistics, time, and money it would take. I would probably fly to Chicago, you fly to Canada, we would meet. This session is seamless. Right. And it was like, I think the change, many of the elements of the change are here to stay.
We all have Zoom fatigue, and some of that productivity is because we're living at work, not working at home, as it were. Yep. But under those cynical, skeptical ha-ha-has is the truth that the efficiency explosion in the last year is a revelation.
Yeah.
And when we see the story written by my teammate Lucas Erb about Frank, who everybody pays attention to Frank because of the man bun. Pay no attention to the man bun. He's a chief algorithms officer. And he comes into work one day finding everybody shooting daggers and less than eloquent language his way because the deputy human resources algo gave itself a battlefield promotion to head CHRO, and subsequently docked everybody 30% pay. Why? Not because of Terminator Matrix malevolence, but because of some implicit bias based on legacy understanding of zip codes and what people used to be worth in the quote flyover states and suburbs. And so again, not a Black Mirror episode, more of a leaders would be wise to consider thoughtfully regulating what the algorithms can decide kind of an exercise. And then the final lens, the economy lens, is really a push and a pull between two very popular talk tracks around global finance. One is scarcity. It's we're using all the resources. Planet is getting hotter. True and true. Nobody's saying it's not. But then on the other side, it's like, yeah, well, but thanks to increasing liquidity, capital markets, human ingenuity, and space exploration, we can think our way out of these problems, and they're not really problems. And so is it what Peter Diamandis would call the abundance frame of, hey, we're going to be fine? Or is it, a little bit more of a Chicken Little freak out frame of not unless we change a lot of stuff really, really quick? Well, the story there is of Alex. They're a bureaucrat focused on legislating the international allocation of the internet. And Alex is facing a absolute pickle of, do we close off half of the world because their values don't align with their half of the world's values? Or do they believe in the primacy of open and free information? And so it's an exploration of a concept that government folks call the splinter net, and the idea that maybe one true internet is going to be relegated to the kind of historical panacea of the late 20th century. So taken together, and I'm moving at pace because I really want to leave time for the great questions I see in the chat and in Dalibor for our dialogue. This idea of the future is coming. It's coming faster, and it's coming along these known tracks. We took that lens concept and we looked at just pure tech. And what we were able to see is that a lot of these seemingly out of left field curiosities, right? Elon Musk putting chips in pigs' brains. What's that all about? Well, it's not as random as it seems, right? Through this long lens, brain-computer interfaces are part of this march for interaction towards simplicity, right? The PhD lab coat crowd from 100 years ago, right? Giving way to my daughter simply asking in the kitchen, hey, what's the weather? Right? Giving way, as I said earlier, to my granddaughter, not even having to ask. Because the digital Downton Abbey, the collection of intelligent agents, will know what she needs and coddle her, right? On the information front, it's this relentless move towards intelligence. And it's not about the robots are coming. The robots have come. AI is not new. Since 1955, AI is whatever the hell computers can't do yet. Right? In 1995, that meant beating Garry Kasparov in chess. Right? In 2005, it meant beating Chris Moneymaker in poker. In 2015, it meant beating the Chinese at the game of Go. The real takeaway is the robots are already here. And so as we'll get to in a second, it's how do we make sure they're on our side, right? And then the final bit, computation, right? Back to that abundance bit, is just when we think we're reaching these limits of transistors and thermodynamics and MIPS, millions of instructions per second. Like Jeff Goldblum's character in Jurassic Park, life finds a way, and we cook up these newfangled answers to problems we didn't even know we had. And so you get things like spatial web and quantum computing, which is another talk. The takeaways here, everybody, for leaders, for those of you who are thinking, okay, what do I do with this? Well, here's what you do with this, everybody. One, in a world where interfaces get simpler and more virtual, and smart glasses and smart contact lenses and goodness gracious chips in our brains, we got to make sure we don't leave anybody behind, right? And so we kind of land the plane there with mind the digital gap, right? It's a beautiful future as long as everybody has the kit, right? The gear. right? We can't allow commercial niceties to be table stakes for human rights. On the intelligence front, the robots are here. What are we going to do? Well, teach your digital children well, right? This is when you hear about explainable AI and AI bias and all the rest. This is what stewardship is going to look like, right? As we move human discernment and decision-making in silico into machines, teach the machines well, right? Let's make sure we have good digital children, as it were. And by good, I mean ethical. Expressions of who we want to be, maybe not who we've been. And then finally, the big brassy call to action is invest in two things: margins and moonshots. Margins just means space to play, space to innovate, space to dream, right? Remember Google 10 years ago, famously, if you were interviewing someone, they'd say, do y'all have 20% time? And you'd say, what's that? And they say, well, Google lets us work on whatever we want on Fridays. Well, I don't know that it needs to be 20%, but you better have space, because nerd alert, the electric light didn't come from the continuous improvement of candles. And so many of us are focused on quarterly numbers and quarreling constituents, right? That we're not leaving the space to think differently enough. So we call that margin. And then moonshots is the big stuff, right? Where's our Apollo program, right? Right now, it's in the hands of a lot of private industry, and God bless them. But I think there's an opportunity for big brassy bets that mobilize and inspire. So with that, my friend,
Yeah.
Futurism 101 would be delighted to discuss any and all of this with our guests. And we have lots of questions coming in. Sorry about the barking dogs.
I've had a pleasure of working very recently with a gentleman by the name of David Johnston. He actually was our former Governor General of Canada, Right Honorable David Johnston. And we had him contribute to a project we were working on, the strategy, AI strategy. And he made something very interesting. He's actually an internationally recognized expert on trust. He published a book on trust and working on the next one. He is seeing and tracking a very visible erosion of trust in our traditional public institutions and emergence of trust in corporations as a trend. Yeah. Which is first time that something like this is experienced by society, by humanity. Historically, the trust has laid with, academia and universities and governments and such. But this is shift. This is evident. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts and reactions of that in the context of what you were describing, specifically. It's sort of the information lens into the future, and the fact that you just recently mentioned the importance of the ethics and corporations leaning in to be our species moonshot players now.
Man, the trust thing it's central, I think, to what's going on in geopolitics and in emergent distributed decentralized finance, DeFi, or what we muggles think of as blockchain and crypto. Here's the way we've been seeing it and proposed to talk about it. For a couple thousand years, all the way up to the printing of not so long ago money, right? It was in God we trust. The belief that there's a prime mover, pick your faith, right? This isn't theology. This is just a history, that there are prime movers that ensure equity, truth, and justice. And we can trust that. In the 20th century, chalk it up to a couple of world wars and other stuff. It became in institutions we trust.
Yep.
Right? Brands, just as you said. Well, one way to think about the emergence of blockchain and the whole decentralized movement is we call it in math we trust. And it's this idea that none of us is as trustworthy as all of us. And that because I can't figure out which version of the truth to believe in, is it the left? Is it the right? Right? Is it the red, the blue? You pick your poison. There's a feeling that they all might be poison. And so if none of us is as trustworthy as all of us, you have this emergence of decentralized finance, which is no brokers, no middlemen. It's consensus, a single view of the truth as determined by who? Everybody.
Yeah.
Now that's one view, but on the other end, you've got people saying, no, in China, for example, that's not needed so much because the government, right, the nation state stands as the proxy. No, you trust us. Right? And I'm not here to debate politics. I'm just here to say that, to your point, it's going to be interesting to see single entities trying to do battle for trustworthiness with hordes of cryptographically validated chains.
Yeah.
Should we look at some of these questions?
Yes, let's do them. So there is one question that asks about your framework and your sort of method of thinking and sorting these futures, about the probabilities. What is the lens through which you think the probabilities are more probable? In other words, what makes it more or less likely to end up in one of those areas in your report?
Yeah. So I don't want to toy with anybody and say, oh yes, patent pending method, highly. Honestly, it's recurring signals. And so if we see 3 to 4 to 5 exponentials projecting a future that looks more like that northern frontier on any given projection versus the south, then we'll say, okay, this is common, it's recurrent, throw it in there as the north side of probable. If we start seeing like singular curves that suggest an even fringier north frontier, you put that up there in the possible. But the basic idea is repetition begets placement. And you'll notice on there, right, kind of infographic or Edward Tufte. I don't know if anybody knows, here's a shell. Edward Tufte, the godfather of data visualization, right? Oh, sorry. There it is. There it is. Great. He would have us drawn and quartered for not having a time dimension on the X or any kind of a scalar on the Y.
Yeah.
And as a Catholic, I'm very good at guilt. And I'll say guilty on both counts. But LENS stands cheekily. We built a reverse acronym, Longitudinal Emergence Scatter Plot, which is our way of simply saying we can get a sense of order of operations and relative likelihood by running the lines through the lens. We're not yet at the point where we can say 22% possibility.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And that's probably that's unreasonable expectation for any sort of futurist to make, especially at the pace of change that we are seeing now, right? So,
well, yeah. So, Dalibor, we often say it's skeptics think the future's opaque. Wide-eyed optimists think it's transparent, crystal clear. Our word is translucent, right? Shapes and shadows.
Yeah.
Shapes and shadows. We feel pretty good about those.
The question came about clearly AI, robotics, cognitive automation are all present and connected. Do we know, or any examples of industries where there is clearly a significant commercial adoption of these ecosystems already happening? What might those be, Mike?
Yeah. There tends to be, again, as futurists, we've established we're closet historians. So we spend a lot of time looking back, right? There was this phenomenon in Japan after World War II, right? Where, to put it politely and professionally, their infrastructure had been compromised. And their jump to cellular technology was quick and clean because they didn't have to deal with as much in the way of legacy telephone poles because it wasn't around. Well, one of the themes we're seeing is that some of the corners of business, of commerce, which have been least touched by traditional IT, are the most ripe for these big leaps forward. Supply chain is a great example, right? Supply chains have been, they kind of missed the internet party, like procurement and manufacturing, like that different crowd.
Yeah.
And as such, the introduction of the ones just mentioned, AI, cognitive automation, robots and drones, computer vision, 5G, pick your term, um, revelation to the ability to do everything from package picking and sorting, like what Amazon's up to real-time delivery. And in Australia, they're piloting drone deliveries for real. And so um, sector by sector, but I would say look to the really old areas because they're the most ready for a quantum leap as opposed to an incremental move.
That's actually a very insightful observation, that we should be not thinking about which industry is adopting, but which elements of production, I guess, are ripe for the disruption. And I love that you use the supply chain. As a matter of fact, I do know that that story is told in our Tech Trends 2021. A gentle plug for that. There it is.
There it
and
is.
It cleverly titled Supply Unchained. Very, yes, exactly.
But
now,
you're
what
right.
is also important, now that we're on that topic, both Tech Trends 2021 are actually freely downloadable material, and so is this World Economic Forum report. So whoever is interested to actually go and read this report and actually enjoy these stories at peace and their own time, it is a freely downloadable, easily searchable report, Technology Futures, WEF and Deloitte. Next question that we got here, I think, is also an interesting one. It's about Boston Dynamics and these impressive and scary videos of their headless dogs running around. It is clearly moving very fast. Do you see resistance with respect of that kind of adoption? There's a comment there also about military adoption seems logical. What about commercial adoption? Like any comments on those? I think we've all seen those videos.
So it's very interesting. There's a wonderful YouTube video. It's like YouTube Hall of Fame, right up there with Charlie Bit My Finger and all the classics, called Humans Need Not Apply. It's by an entity, I don't even know who they are, named CPG Gray. And it's just this curious 5-minute telling of everything you think robots aren't going to be able to do, you're wrong, they will, right? Including poetry, art, the rest of it.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I think AIs, our teams looked at this. We wrote a Future of AI report, another one you can Google, Deloitte Future of AI, seeing the forest for the trees and the forest beyond. But in there, what we recognized was that AI has been the kind of undisputed captain of the math team for a generation, right? If you need to do arithmetic and work in bits and pixels, AI's come a long, long way. And it feels acceptable because it's bits and pixels. It's safely hiding behind the screen, right? Behind the glass. I think the Boston Dynamics robots and anything that's built out of atoms and not pixels causes us alarm because it causes us moral hazard. It's in our space. If the pixels go south, you turn it off and go away, right? If the robot goes south, good luck. And so part of it is the inhabiting physical space and feeling mortal danger. But if you get beyond just that instinctive threat, you realize that AIs aren't malevolent. They're not bad. They're just trying to get their job done. I always think back to Dalibor. Remember The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the original Fantasia with Mickey?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I had an old colleague who said, AI gone rogue is a lot like the sorcerer's brooms. They're not trying to get you. Rather, you're in their way.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah.
just trying to clean. And so I think what we need to do, therefore, with the robots and the rest is recognize that our revulsion, to use a heavy word, but it's the right word, our revulsion is coming from a place of our reptile brain. It's like,
Yeah,
it's animal-like, right? Like you said, weird headless dogs.
yeah,
That's instinctive reaction. Our thoughtful reaction needs to be, oh, they're not evil. They're trying to accomplish an objective. Let's make sure the objectives are clear, explainable. And back to Isaac Asimov, like the three rules, that doing no harm to us is way up there in the programming order.
yeah. The I'm going to ask you a little bit to comment a little bit about like where might people go to read and get informed and perhaps get excited and get their minds working.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with two of my authors that I just love listening. And what is incredible is that if you think about it, YouTube can be used for good and bad, like every technology.
Yeah.
I'm finding it's incredible that now you can actually go on YouTube and listen to you know professors,
Right.
like, you know, well, from Carl Sagan to Yuval Noah Harari, giving lessons, and you know, you can choose to spend your time that way. So I will mention Yuval Noah Harari as a phenomenal storyteller, and especially his sort of second book and third that do touch on the topic of the history of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And also Steven Pinker, who is our sort of Canadian intellectual, who is a professor, of course, at Harvard, with his Enlightenment Now and the story of really that should give us all a pause to appreciate and be grateful of how far we have actually come as species. And I think that like those are the two where I would be starting. And I would love to hear you, Mike. What might be some other
places to go, things
places
to,
to go and things to read. And
I love your point, Dalibor, about the vastness of the bounty on YouTube. You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, you could watch, you know, hashtag fail videos of people falling into water all day, or you could read Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
So excellent point. I think I'll give two slightly maybe curious people to keep tabs on. There's a former founder and VC by the name of Balaji Srinivasan, who is very active on Twitter and is just, I think, one of the most intriguing humans, because his perspectives on what blockchain means, what crypto means, why it is what it is, and where it might be headed. On one hand, it's very provocative and opinionated. And, you know, as at Deloitte and as advisors to governments and corporations, we make a point not to make definitive forward-looking statements. We talk about what might be. This guy talks about what he thinks will be, but it's always good reading. And the other, just as a tip of the hat back to fiction and the utility of admiring problems, right? Something we often say in business, we don't have time to admire the problem. Fiction lets you admire a problem. And I'd recommend my longtime favorite author, Neil Stephenson. If you're into cryptography and military history, his book Cryptonomicon will melt your brain. If you're into the early days of the internet, his book Snow Crash is a classic. He wrote a book called Seven Eves that explored practically with hard science what the hell happens if the moon explodes and falls to Earth, and you've got 40 months to get all life off of Earth. Now, on one hand, that's folly, that's fiction. But on the other hand, you come away from it thinking a little differently and a little more apt to dream up electric lights than better candles.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you very much, Mike. We are now actually at time. This was delightful. Thank you so much on behalf of all the audience members who joined us. And for the audience, thank you for giving us this hour. As you may or may not know, 2 weeks from now, at same time, same place, in 2 weeks, I will be hosting our next CIO guest as part of the series called Conversations with Tech Executives Shaping the Future of Canada, that we are putting together alongside with the CIO Strategy Council. And it'll be David Markwell, the CIO of Loblaws. That will be a very interesting one. Loblaws, as Mike, you would know, it was actually featured on Deloitte's Global Tech Trends 2021 for the good things that they are doing with their data. So that should be an interesting conversation. So please register and join me for that. And on that happy note, Mike, thank you so much again for your time. It's always a pleasure and delight. And I wish everybody a happy Wednesday, and see you soon.
Thank you, Dalibor.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.